Howard Johnson's Howard Johnson's or Howard Johnson by Wyndham is a worldwide American-owned chain of hotels and motels located primarily throughout the United States. It was also a chain of restaurants for over 90 years and widely known for that alone. Founded by Howard Deering Johnson, it was the largest restaurant chain in the U.S. throughout the 1960s and 1970s, with more than 1,000 combined company-owned and franchised outlets. Howard Johnson Hotels and Motels are now part of Wyndham Hotels and Resorts. Howard Johnson's restaurants were franchised separately from the hotel brand beginning in 1986, but in the years that followed, severely dwindled in number and all but disappeared by the turn of the century. As of 2016, only one Howard Johnson's restaurant remains in Lake George, New York. The food and beverage rights to the brand are currently owned by Wyndham Hotels and Resorts. The line of branded supermarket frozen foods, including ice cream, is no longer manufactured. History. Early years. In 1925, Howard Deering Johnson borrowed $2,000 to buy and operate a small corner pharmacy in Wollaston, a neighborhood in Quincy, Massachusetts. Johnson was surprised to find it easy to pay back the money lent to him after discovering his recently installed soda fountain had become the busiest part of his drugstore. Eager to ensure that his store would remain successful, Johnson decided to devise a new ice cream recipe. Some sources say the recipe was based on his mother's homemade ice creams and desserts, while others say that it was from a local German immigrant who either sold or gave Johnson the ice cream recipe. The new recipe made the ice cream more flavorful due to increased butterfat content. Eventually, Johnson created 28 flavors of ice cream. He is quoted as saying, "I thought I had every flavor in the world. That 28 flavors of ice cream became my trademark." The stands sold soft drinks, hot dogs, and ice cream. Each stand was successful. With his success becoming more noticeable every year, Johnson convinced local bankers to lend him funds to operate a sit-down restaurant. Negotiations were made, and toward the end of the decade, the first Howard Johnson's restaurant opened in Quincy. It featured fried clams, baked beans, chicken pot pies, frankfurters, ice cream, and soft drinks. The first Howard Johnson's restaurant received a tremendous boost in 1929, owing to an unusual set of circumstances. The mayor of nearby Boston, Malcolm Nichols, banned the production of Eugene O'Neill's play Strange Interlude in Boston. Rather than fight the mayor, the Theatre Guild moved the production to Quincy. The 5-hour play was presented in 2 parts with a dinner break. The first Howard Johnson's restaurant was near the theater, and hundreds of influential Bostonians flocked to the restaurant. Through word of mouth, more Americans became familiar with the Howard Johnson Company. Expansion in the 1930s and 1940s. Johnson wanted to expand his company, but the stock market crash of 1929 prevented this. After waiting a few years and maintaining his business, Johnson persuaded an acquaintance in 1932 to open a second Howard Johnson's restaurant in Orleans, Massachusetts. The second restaurant was franchised and not company-owned. This was one of America's first franchising agreements. By the end of 1936, there were 39 more franchised restaurants, creating a total of 41 Howard Johnson's restaurants. By 1939, there were 107 Howard Johnson's restaurants along American East Coast highways, generating revenues of $10.05 million. In less than 14 years, Johnson directed a franchise network of over 10,000 employees with 170 restaurants, many serving 1.5 million people a year. Johnson's success gave him added opportunity to capitalize on getting his name around. When wealthy socialite Dorothy May Kennicott Parrish, known as Sister Parrish, began her decorating business in the 1930s, Johnson hired her to decorate the restaurant he built in Somerville, New Jersey. She told a reporter from the New York Times, "I dressed the waitresses in aqua, did the walls in aqua, I made the placemats in aqua, I guess I must have thought it was quite chic, but I haven't done a thing in aqua since," quoted in A History of Howard Johnson's by Anthony Mitchell Somerco. The unique icons of orange roofs, cupolas, and weather vanes on Howard Johnson properties helped patrons identify the chain's restaurants and motels. The restaurant's trademark, Simple Simon, and the Peaman logo was created by artist John Alcott in the 1930s, while the fiberglass signs were sculptured by Charles Pizzano. There were 200 Howard Johnson's restaurants when America entered World War II. By 1944, only 12 Howard Johnson's restaurants remained in business. The effects of war rationing had crippled the company. Johnson managed to maintain his business by serving commissary food to war workers and U.S. Army recruits. When the Pennsylvania Turnpike 1940 and later the Ohio Turnpike. In the process of recovering from these losses, in 1947, the Howard Johnson Company began construction of 200 new restaurants throughout the American Southeast and Midwest. By 1951, the sales of the Howard Johnson Company totaled $115 million. Entering the hotel business, by 1954, there were 400 Howard Johnson's restaurants in 32 states, about 10% of which were extremely profitable company-owned Turnpike restaurants. The rest were franchises. This was one of the first nationwide restaurant chains. While many places sold fried clams, they were whole, which was not universally accepted by the American dining public. Howard Johnson popularized Safran Brothers Clam Company's fried clam strips, the foot of hard-shelled sea clams. They became popular to eat in this fashion throughout the country. In 1954, the company opened the first Howard Johnson's Motor Lodge in Savannah, Georgia. The company employed architects Rufus Nims and Carl Koch to oversee the design of the rooms and gate lodge. Nims had previously worked with the company designing restaurants. The restaurant's trademark, Simple Simon, and the Peaman was now joined by a lamplighter character in the firm's marketing of its motels. According to cultural historians, the chain became synonymous with travel among American motorists and vacationers, in part because of Johnson's ubiquitous outdoor advertising displays. In 1959, Howard Deering Johnson, who had founded and managed the company since 1925, the elder Johnson observed his son's running of the company until his death in 1972 at the age of 75. Howard Johnson Company went public in 1961. There were 605 restaurants, 265 company-owned and 340 franchised, as well as 88 franchised Howard Johnson's Motor Lodges in 32 states and the Bahamas. In 1961, Johnson hired New York chefs Pierre Franey and Jack Pepin to oversee food development at the company's main commissary in Brockton, Massachusetts. Franey and Pepin developed recipes for the company's signature dishes that could be flash frozen and delivered across the country, guaranteeing a consistent product. Civil rights. While the landmark Brown v. Board of Education decision by the United States Supreme Court in 1954 struck down segregation in public schools, the segregation and maintenance of whites-only public facilities continued in other domains, including the Howard Johnson chain. Segregation in Howard Johnson's restaurants provoked an international crisis in 1957 when a Howard Johnson eatery in Dover, Delaware refused service to Kamla Agbeli Jibidama, the finance minister of Ghana, prompting a public apology from President Dwight D. Eisenhower. The Congress of Racial Equality, or CORE, was instrumental in organizing protests and sit-ins at Howard Johnson locations in multiple states. The city of Durham, North Carolina, became notable as a focus for action against segregated restaurants and hotels, including Howard Johnson's. On 12 August 1962, attorney and civil rights activist Floyd McKissick initiated the first of multiple rallies and demonstrations against segregated establishments in Durham, including the Howard Johnson's restaurant on Chapel Hill Boulevard, culminating in multiple protests on 18-20 May 1963, resulting in mass arrests as well as an event. Future Senator and presidential candidate Bernie Sanders while a student at the University of Chicago in 1962, helped organize picketing of a Howard Johnson's location in Cicero, Illinois, during his time as a student activist for CORE. By 7 December 1962, the Howard Johnson Company issued a statement to the press. The letter, written in conjunction with CORE and the NOP, praised the organizations and aligned company policy with their outlook that segregation was not defensible. Howard Johnson's restaurants by the 1960s were known to be accommodating to members of the LGBTQ community, particularly in metropolitan New York. On April 21, 1966, at the Howard Johnsons in the Greenwich Village neighborhood, Dick Leitch, Craig Rodwell, and John Timmons, all members of the New York chapter of the Mattachine Society, an early American gay rights group, patronized the restaurant as part of a sit-in demonstration in protest of New York liquor laws that prevented serving gay customers. The men were served drinks without incident at the restaurant. They later visited Julius Bar, where they were denied service, eventually leading to changes in the laws. In the late 1960s, gay liberation activist and self-identified drag queen Marsha P. Johnson decided on the drag queen name Marsha P. Johnson, getting Johnson from the Howard Johnson's restaurant on 42nd Street. New chains and a changing public. In the 1930s, H.D. Johnson bought the Wayland Red Coach Grill and used it as the model for a new concept, a more upscale steakhouse restaurant chain called Red Coach Grills. While they had some success, they were not sufficiently profitable. Eventually, the last 15 Red Coach Grills were sold in 1983 to a company executive who closed them. In 1969, Johnson again tried a new restaurant concept, Ground Round. It was successful. Though not a Howard Johnson's restaurant, the Ground Round chain was company-owned and franchised, thus increasing the Howard Johnson Company profit. The energy crisis of the mid-1970s shifted the focus of the business. Rather than promoting the restaurants to travelers, management knew it had to focus on nearby population centers. The 28 flavors of ice cream and piggy-bank-sensitive meal prices made it possible to lure families. The company also started some child-friendly promotions. One was a birthday club. Children signed up in advance and were sent birthday cards redeemable for a free meal, a cake, and in some locations, balloons and lollipops. Family members' meals were charged at normal rates. The Springfield, New Jersey restaurant sent out 10,000 cards one year, and they had a 50% return on those who came to take advantage of the birthday offer. Children's menus were an attractive staple of Howard Johnson's. In addition to offering kid-friendly food at lower prices, industrial designer John Alcott's firm created a variety of menus that kept the kids entertained. Some were maps of the United States. One was a guide to the metric system. Another menu could be converted to a mask if string was added at home. Howard Johnson's also held contests. If a person submitted proof by a check-off coupon that they had sampled all 28 flavors of ice cream, the next ice cream cone was free. By 1975, the Howard Johnson Company had more than 1,000 restaurants and more than 500 motor lodges in 42 states and Canada. The company reached its peak that year, but the late 1970s marked the beginning of the end for the Howard Johnson Company. Because of the oil embargo of 1974, the Howard Johnson's restaurants and motor lodges, which received 85% of revenue from travelers, lost profits when Americans could not afford long trips or frequent vacations. Also, the company model of serving pre-made food with high-quality ingredients in traditional dining rooms was costly when compared to the innovations introduced by fast food outlets like McDonald's, which designed its products and restaurants to appeal to families with younger children. Around this time, the chain introduced Hojo Cola and other private label sodas, which disappointed some customers who preferred familiar products such as Coca-Cola or Pepsi. The company suffered from two infamous incidents at a property in the New Orleans Central Business District within 18 months of one another. The first was a July 1971 fire set by two irate guests who had been ejected from the hotel, which killed 6 people. The second, in January 1973, was a harrowing day-long siege. Former Black Panther Mark Essex used the hotel's roof as a sniper's perch, killing 3 police officers, the hotel's general manager and assistant general manager, and a couple from Virginia who were on a belated honeymoon. He also wounded policemen, firemen, and civilians. Then, in Jericho, New York, on 8 November 1974, singer-actress Connie Francis was raped at the Jericho Turnpike Howard Johnson's lodge. She sued the motel chain for their lapse in security and won a judgment of $2.05 million, one of the largest such judgments at that time, leading to a reform in hotel security. Her rapist was never found. H.B. Johnson attempted to streamline company operations and cut costs, such as serving cheaper food and having fewer employees. This strategy was unsuccessful because patrons compared this new era of Howard Johnson's restaurants and motor lodges unfavorably to the services they had previously come to know. In a further effort to make the company more successful and profitable, Johnson created other concepts, such as Ho-Joss campgrounds and 3-penny inns for lodging, as well as deli baker ice cream maker and chats for restaurants. All of these concepts failed, furthering the company's demise. In the late 1990s, the Howard Johnson's Candy Factory and executive offices in Wollaston were purchased and renovated by the Eastern Nazarene College to form the Adams Executive Center. Changes in ownership. In 1979, Johnson accepted an acquisition bid of more than $630 million from Imperial Group plc of London, England. Imperial obtained 1040 restaurants, 75% company-owned/25% franchised, and 520 motor lodges, 75% franchise/25% company-owned. In 1981, Imperial recruited J. Michael Hostage, then CEO of Continental Baking Company and formerly executive vice president of Marriott Corporation. After 4 years, despite progress in a turnaround, Imperial reversed course and sold the company. Having declined to entertain Hostage's proposal to lead a leveraged buyout, Imperial employed Goldman Sachs, who, with Hostage's assistance, sold the company to Marriott in 1986. In a contemporaneous transaction, Marriott sold the Motor Lodge business and the Howard Johnson trademark to Prime Motor Inns, a New Jersey company. Marriott was interested in the company-owned restaurants for the real estate. Marriott already owned Big Boy Restaurants and Roy Rogers Restaurants. In 1982, it acquired Host International, which had operated a number of highway rest stops. Many of the established Howard Johnson sites were in prime highway locations which could be profitably converted to Big Boy or various fast food banners. As Marriott quickly demolished the company-owned restaurants or converted them to the Bob's Big Boy restaurant chain, only the franchised restaurants remained untouched. Marriott left all company-owned and franchised motor lodges untouched, as the deal called for them to be sold a year later, in 1986, to Prime Motors Inns, an existing franchisee with 63 motels. Divestment of motor lodges. Prime Motors Inns continued to preserve the lodges, just as Marriott had, until weak hotel and real estate markets caused it to sell off its assets and cease operations in 1990. Those involved with the company-owned and franchised motor lodges banded together and formed the Howard Johnson Acquisition Corporation. They successfully obtained all the rights to operate and maintain the company-owned and franchised lodges. With these rights maintained, they changed their name to Howard Johnson International Incorporated, which became a subsidiary of Hospitality Franchise Systems Incorporated, which eventually merged with other companies to form Cendant. In 2006, Cendant split itself into Wyndham Worldwide and 3 other companies. Wyndham operated the Howard Johnson brand under many tiers based on price, level of amenities, and services offered. Under Cendant/Wyndham, The chain became a parking place for franchise conversions, which were existing independent motels which had been renovated and added to the chain in order to provide them with access to a nationally recognized name and central reservation infrastructure. As these properties were not originally constructed as Howard Johnson sites, they lacked the distinctive architecture, and some had no restaurant at all. Howard Johnson Expresses, Howard Johnson Inns, Howard Johnson Hotels, and Howard Johnson Plaza hotels range from limited service motels to full-service properties with on-site concierges and business centers. Howard Johnson began offering a rise and dine continental breakfast at some economy limited service locations. The chain abolished the multiple price tiers by 2015. Divestment of restaurant brand. While the Howard Johnson Company owned and franchised motor lodges have stood the test of time since being sold by the Howard Johnson Company in 1979, the restaurants have not. Because Marriott eliminated all the company-owned restaurants, the owners of the franchised restaurants feared elimination and banded together in 1986 and created Franchise Associates Incorporated, or FAI. In 1986, Marriott gave FAI the rights to operate and maintain Howard Johnson's restaurants. When Cendant acquired the Howard Johnson's motor lodges, they offered to work together with FAI to ensure the expansion of the restaurant chain. As early as 1987, FAI Chairman George Carter acknowledged that we have the concept, but it desperately needs to be modernized internally and externally. Howard Johnson was allowed to become tired and stale. We must get rid of that plastic image. Anything can be salvageable if a great deal of time and money and effort is put in it. Attempts were made to revamp 25% of the menu and create new signage, but these efforts proved insufficient as the long-neglected chain continued to lose ground to mass-market fast food operations. By March 1995, while the Howard Johnson's restaurant chain was preserved, FAI did not have enough money to expand to new locations or revamp the brand. With the exception of one Howard Johnson's ice cream parlor in Puerto Rico, FAI never opened a new restaurant or expanded the chain. An existing restaurant in Canton, Massachusetts, was remodeled as a prototype for a new era of Howard Johnson's restaurants, but the concept failed, and after less than a decade of operation, the prototype restaurant closed in the spring of 2000. By 2005, there were fewer than 8 surviving restaurants. A combination of no vision, no reinvestment of capital, aging restaurants, a stale menu, lack of marketing or new ideas, and competition from other chains had taken their toll. Restaurants were closing their doors. FAI ceased operations in 2005. Cendant acquired the rights to operate and maintain the remaining Howard Johnson's restaurants. In 2006, Cendant sold them to La Mancha Group LLC, which had proposed an aggressive expansion of the restaurant chain that never materialized. After the Waterbury, Connecticut restaurant became the Brass House Restaurant in April 2007, only 3 locations remained. Cendant split into 4 smaller companies in 2006. Its hotel group became Wyndham Worldwide, while other pieces were spun off separately to become Avis Budget Group, Realogy Travelport, and Affinion Group. A line of Howard Johnson branded frozen foods disappeared from grocery stores after Fairfield Farms Kitchens shut down its Brockton, Massachusetts plant in 2006 and America's Kitchen of Atlanta, Georgia shut down in May 2008. 2010s. In spring 2012, one of the last 3 original Howard Johnson's restaurants closed in Lake George and was listed for sale. Television personality, chef and author Rachel Ray once worked at that site while living in Lake George as a teenager. By 2013, only 2 original restaurants remained open, but the Bangor Hotel and restaurant no longer had the distinctive orange roof. While the highest tier in the hotel franchise, Hojo Hotel Plaza, does include a restaurant, there is no requirement that these replicate menus, format, or branding of the former Howard Johnson restaurant chain. With La Mancha Group LLC no longer active, Wyndham Hotel Group now owned the rights to the Hojo's food business as well as the Howard Johnson hotel chain. In 2013, Wyndham proposed a Howard Johnson brand reinvigoration, which would bring select flavors of ice cream back to the hotels, adopt a new logo, phase out the multiple branding tiers, and give the properties a facelift and redesign as a lower mid-scale chain starting in 2015. In August 2014, the Lake George restaurant regained the Howard Johnson's name when the lease was transferred from its original owners, DeSantis Enterprises, to John Larrock. The restaurant reopened 10 January 2015, briefly bringing the number of locations back up to 3. On 31 March 2015, the Lake Placid, NY, Howard Johnson's closed, leaving only 2 locations remaining. Then, in September 2016, the Bangor restaurant closed, leaving the Lake George restaurant, the last location remaining out of the original 1,000 plus. Last remaining restaurant. Despite the Lake George Howard Johnson's restaurant proclaimed resilience as the last one standing, its future has been put in question. In January 2017, its land went up for sale and redevelopment projects have been proposed for the site since. On October 12, 2017, owner John Larrock was arrested and convicted of sexual harassment of female employees, and on October 31, 2018 began serving a 6-month jail sentence. The restaurant continues to operate with Larrock as owner, but is open limited days and hours. With all the food commissaries defunct and no official connection with Wyndham, the restaurant operates as an independent entity. Use of the Howard Johnson's restaurant name is permitted because of a grandfather clause. Despite retaining the original building and trademark name, but with little to no connection to the former franchise, its authenticity as a true Howard Johnson's restaurant has been questioned due to its dissimilar menu and negative reviews. In popular culture, to produce the 1958 Norman Rockwell painting The Runaway, Rockwell staged the lunch counter scene at a Pittsfield, MA location. All references to the restaurant chain, including the dairy bar mirrors, were removed in the final piece. The film 2001, A Space Odyssey 1968, was one of the first to carry product placements for companies such as Howard Johnson's, whose logos appear aboard the space station. The chain's lamplighter was also updated to the Earthlight Room on the space station, a Howard Johnson's lounge for passengers taking the moon shuttle. In the scene where the Russian scientists share a drink with Dr. Floyd, it is shown that the restaurant chain servicing the space station is Howard Johnson's. The chain featured a 2001 tie-in in its children's menu. A substantial portion of the Mad Men Season 5 episode, Faraway Places, involves Don and Megan Draper's trip to the Howard Johnson's restaurant and motor lodge in Plattsburgh, New York. However, exteriors were actually shot in Baldwin Park, California. In response, Howard Johnson's launched a promotion referencing the appearance to include a letter addressed to the character of Don Draper in the style of letterhead used in that era. In the 1974 film Blazing Saddles, which is set in 1874, a joke is made of recreating the town of Rock Ridge right down to the orange roof on Howard Johnson's outhouse, and signage boasting one flavor. The character named Howard Johnson was played by John Hillerman. In the 1984 comedy film Top Secret, set in East Germany, a spy arranges to meet one of the main characters at Howard Johnson's, which never had any locations in East Germany. In the Season 3 episode of Arrested Development, the ocean walker, George Essar, recounts that he married Lucille because some cheap waitress at a Hojo said she used an IUD, to which she responds it was Stuckey's, prompting George Essar to retort, "But I believed you, leaved you." The hotel was featured in the 2019 film The Irishman. In the 1964 Hitchcock thriller Marnie, Sean Connery, and Tippi Hedren were filmed arriving at and dining inside the Howard Johnson's in the Springfield Shopping Center in Springfield Township, Delaware County, Pennsylvania. The 1972 NRBQ album Scraps features a song called Howard Johnson's Got His Hojo Working Terry Adams. The song is a tongue-in-cheek protest to the monopoly that Howard Johnson's had on many turnpike service plazas across the country, charging ridiculously high prices for food.